Welcome to this session on indirect learning. My name is Sarah Nerling, and I am the learning consultant with PMA. This session does not target any specific TKX tasks or skills, but it should help you learn just about any of them. Before we dive into this session, I'd like to share with you a story about a cat.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that. I think if you click the up arrow next to this.
Okay, that was hilarious, right? But what did you learn? Please pause this video for 2 minutes to share with the person next to you what you learned from this video. Then, once the 2 minutes are up, hit the play button to continue. I hope your neighbor had some great insights for you. You might have learned about the dangers of sharing devices with your colleagues or your colleagues' kids, or maybe about the need to update your software. The judge for this case, Judge Roy Ferguson, decided to help others learn from this lesson, so they didn't have to go through this painful learning themselves. He shared this video clip on Twitter and wrote, "Important Zoom tip. If a child used your computer, before you join a virtual hearing, check the Zoom video options to be sure filters are off. This kitten just made a formal announcement on a case on the 394th. The cat judge has given us some things to think about, so let's now build on them. In this session, we will talk about 2 types of indirect learning and examples of both, benefits of learning this way, and how to get the most out of or boost these types of learning, both as a learner and as an instructor. So what are these 2 types of indirect learning? Do we know them? Do we already use them? Let's find out. Many times in daily life and work, even when you're not being intentional about learning, you are learning. You might not even realize that you're learning, which can be discouraging. Remember when we were asking you in Slack and during check-ins what you learned over the past few months? Many of you said, "I don't think I learned anything." I'm nearly sure that you did. Some of our learning can be indirect. We're learning about something without actually being the one doing that something or having that experience. Do you remember when you were young and sometimes you'd watch your older relatives drive a car or cook a meal, and it started shaping your understanding of how those things are done? You knew that you had to put a key in the car before it started, and that you had to light the fire on the burner before you put the pan down. These all happened through indirect learning. And with the lawyer cat just now, you learned something from his experience without being that lawyer cat yourself, without even having been on the call with him, and without having watched that clip thinking, I'm going to learn something about Zoom today. Let's talk about 2 types of this indirect learning. They're very similar, but don't worry too much about distinguishing between them. Just remember that they're both ways to learn and are both very valuable. In observational learning, you are the learner and you are there to observe and learn. Maybe you're watching something live or you're watching the video recording of it. You want to see how something is done to then be able to go do it. We use this technique during RE trainings like this one, where we ask volunteers to do a simulation interview. One woman plays the role of the RE and the other plays the role of the respondent. And then all of the other REs, all dozens or hundreds of them, watch this one simulation interview. They aren't playing either role, but we hope they're learning from this, observing the simulation, and they are. But why does this work? How can they learn without actually doing the interview themselves? Well, it works because each RE is imagining herself in the role of the person playing that RE, imagining how she would ask the question, what prompts she would use, how she might respond to the error message that pops up on ODK. Observational learning like this has a handful of benefits. Namely, it saves time. We can all see and learn from the same thing without having to experience it individually. By observing the simulation interview, all of the REs have seen, thought about, and learned from this one interview at the same time. Observational learning also allows for standardization. We are all watching the exact same thing. And if we're watching a video of someone's experience, it can be the exact same thing over many groups across time. This means that all of us learners can have common understandings of challenges that might arise, the tips for doing this work, and other things. Think of that first time that an RE gets to the household roster and they have to think about who is considered a member of the household and who isn't. All of your REs are watching that same simulation interview. They're hearing the same challenges in filling out the household roster. And so once the simulation interview is over, you can talk to everyone at once about how to address these challenges, as they were all commonly observed by all. What's the second type of indirect learning? Well, has anyone ever said they want to live vicariously through you? Maybe you are the one doing lots of fun stuff in your life, maybe climbing a mountain, but by sharing stories with them about your life, they are getting some of that fun that you have. We can learn the same way. We can learn indirectly through others' experiences, having their learning rub off on us. In vicarious learning, you're not there with the express objective of observing them and learning from them, and they're not there specifically to act as a model for you to learn from. In fact, with vicarious learning, it's not only about watching someone or a recording of them. Vicarious learning can also happen from overhearing a conversation or hearing a story from someone about what happened to them. Vicarious learning is less about learning from someone and more about learning through them and their experience. Unlike observational learning, with vicarious learning, you may or may not know that you are learning at that moment. And some say that vicarious learning goes a step further than observational learning, because not only do you observe or hear, but you also need to understand why this person is succeeding or failing, and then imagine yourself taking the correct course of action. Sure, you can simply observe something and learn a little about how to do that thing, but you'll be much more successful if you observe, understand, and imagine. Think about when we started working remotely. How many of us sat down with the sole purpose of learning how to work remotely? I'm guessing you didn't. How many of us heard stories from our colleagues about things that happened to them when they were working remotely, or attended a Zoom workshop where we saw the facilitator having challenges with the new technology and new format? Maybe you were already trying to understand what was going wrong and imagine how to fix it, even if you never used that particular technology before. When work went remote, you didn't just stop everything you were working on to go and take a class on how to be a remote worker. And you didn't learn from only your experiences and mistakes. You kept working, you learned from your experiences and mistakes, and you learned from others' experiences and mistakes. This is vicarious learning at its best. So think about the most useful thing you learned about working remotely before you ever did that thing yourself. How did you learn it? Now, pause this video for 2 minutes to share with the person next to you what you learned and how. Once the 2 minutes are up, hit the play button to continue. So you were learning new and useful things this whole time. Isn't vicarious learning great? Vicarious learning truly has some great benefits. It is easy to obtain and experience. I've spent a lot of time preparing this video, just as you spend a lot of time preparing to support others' learning. But vicarious learning is happening all around us without us doing anything to make it happen. With vicarious learning too, you can learn from the stories. Remember, with vicarious learning, You don't need to be watching something live or overhearing something from someone around you. You don't even necessarily need to be watching a recording of someone doing something. Vicarious learning includes learning that happens by listening to the stories of other people. These stories can come from books and other media where people present their past experiences, actions, and real-life situations. There are some great stories in TED Talks that have helped me learn things vicariously. And finally, vicarious learning takes risk out of the equation. Medical teams need to learn vicariously, or they'd all be making the same fatal mistakes again and again until each person had experienced it for themselves. I remember when I was first working on household surveys, and we used an old software called Pendragon for our data collection. Pendragon was new at the time. When we went to sync the first forms, they disappeared. It took us a week before the Pendragon team confirmed that it wasn't our fault. There was a bug in the software, and these forms were lost forever. I started telling everyone I knew about this horrible experience. Of course, those who worked on surveys learned not to use Pendragon. People who regularly worked with new software were reminded of the risks of using any type of software and the need to have backups. And I think everyone learned about how challenging it was to do data collection. This all sounds great, right? So I should just let vicarious learning and observational learning happen to me and that's it? Or might I try to get the most out of these or boost them? Sure, vicarious learning often starts off unintentionally, but it gets more useful when you're making that mental effort to understand and to imagine. And observational learning doesn't just appear in front of you every day. So just like all the learning types and methods we've talked about over the past few years, the more intentional you are about your learning, the more you'll learn, the deeper you'll learn, and the better that learning will stick with you over the time, even if it all starts off by accident. So as a learner, you can become an observer. Look for opportunities to set yourself up as an observer more often and more intentionally. Can you watch someone facilitate a session and note what makes them effective and what they might improve as a way to learn yourself about how to facilitate? Might you ask a colleague who is troubleshooting in Stata to narrate his experience so you can see when he goes to the Stata manual and how he uses it, when he goes to Google, when he runs codes, and how he makes sense of the error? And sometimes with vicarious learning, you just find yourself in that opportunity when you're in the right place at the right time to overhear someone or to happen to see someone do something. So enjoy it and use that opportunity to its fullest. As a learner, you can also reflect. Just like with the experience sandwich, take the time to stop and reflect on what you're learning. Remember, with vicarious learning, you're not just observing, but you're also understanding why that person is succeeding or failing, and you're actively imagining what it would be like to do the right thing in that situation. It's often helpful to name aloud or write down what you're learning to help solidify and retain that knowledge. Say it with me. I have learned to check my Zoom filters and backgrounds before I get on an important Zoom call, thanks to the lawyer cat. As a learner, you can also search for stories. Because stories are such a flexible and fun way to learn, go searching out the ones that might be most useful for you. Write down and go in search of stories that might help answer what you don't know or don't understand. You might attend conferences or webinars, read books or listen to podcasts, ask colleagues to share stories of their experiences with that thing. And remember, you can do this in person and on our Slack space. You have so many experienced colleagues with so many great stories you can learn from. As an instructor, whether you're formally teaching or maybe you're supporting a colleague's learning or you're facilitating an RE training, you can try to design for observational and vicarious learning. Try to identify opportunities for observation, be they live or recorded, and to encourage vicarious learning and the reflection that is necessary to make this learning more valuable. This might look like pairing up more experienced and less experienced colleagues so they have a chance to observe each other. Sometimes we call this shadowing. This is different from active teaching, as there is little to no preparation required, and it is not structured or directive. The observer is observing only, while the doer is doing. This might also look like asking colleagues regularly what they learned from others, so they can think back to these situations where they just ended up learning vicariously through someone's story, or by overhearing or unintentionally seeing something that helped them understand something. Your questions help them get from the observation part to the understanding and imagining parts of vicarious learning, if they hadn't gotten there already by themselves. And definitely consider how you might leverage observational learning for large groups. When does it make sense to teach something to one learner and have them do that task while everyone watches them, instead of trying to it directly to everyone at once without giving them a chance to observe a peer going through the process? As an instructor, you should also encourage storytelling as a way of learning. That chatter over tea about, oh, did I tell you this thing that I did at work the other day? That can be great for learning. Plus, as much as we like to document learning, and as great as that is for sharing learning across time and space and teams, we don't always read yet another document, but we tend to love telling and hearing stories. Plus, both learners and instructors should remember to recognize and celebrate your learning progress. We can forget that we're learning when it happens through observational or vicarious learning. And sometimes that learning might feel minimal or unintentional, but it's not. And it can be very valuable. It's even better than some types of learning because you don't have to suffer. One cat judge is enough. Okay, let's talk about it. Now it's time to talk about our observational and vicarious learning experiences and see how we might have more of them. Please refer to the discussion guidance in the document that I'll cite here, and take a second to add your thoughts and questions in the Slack space. Enjoy your learning.